I was pleasantly surprised by Saudi Arabia. If you ask many Americans about Saudi Arabia, they're going to say oil, desert, and camels. When you get there, it's a totally different story. One of the main aspects of Vision 2030 was around a vibrant society. So when you're coming in and looking at this and looking to do business, you have access to bright young talent. You have access to fairly untapped markets. So when it kind of came time to move on from Booz Allen, I didn't really want to go back to the US and work with them there. So just talked to a couple of people and some friends, passed my resume around, and ended up getting a call from the leadership at Neom for a job in the health sector. And I remember telling them, "Are you sure that you've got the right guy?"
And they've mastered diversification. I think the UAE been a front runner in that diversification, the multicultural, multi-ethnic city. Do you see Saudi adopting those similar factors to continue their success, of organic growth in different markets? Do they act and behave in the same way, in that open-mindedness? Jordan, welcome.
Thank you.
First of a number of community podcasts that we're hosting. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
A fairly short notice.
Yeah.
But delighted to have you with us and to dive into your journey and have a good understanding about your journey in the Middle East in particular. As a business with bases in the UK and the Middle East, good to just dive into that. So the last 4 years spent with Neom.
Correct.
Talk us about the journey there. How's it been over those 4 years?
Sure. I think a lot of people ask how you end up in the Middle East. I think my journey started long before. It's not my first foray in the region. And this just kind of ended up being a natural occurrence, which led to me being up in Neom for the past nearly 4 years now. Yeah. So I guess the story actually started with me back in Washington, D.C. Went to school at George Washington University, studied international affairs and economics, and was, as any recent grad, looking for the next place to go, looking for the career opportunities, really exciting areas. Loved it. They're going to pay me to live overseas. Yeah. A lot of people's dream. So the thing was, when I graduated, it was 2006. There weren't a ton of career opportunities in the space except for one. Booming industry, lots going on. It was the Iraq War. Yeah. So I ended up starting work for a consulting firm that supported the U.S. Agency for International Development, doing development work. And this that eventually in 2009 took me out to Iraq. And so I've kind of worked on all kinds of different things. When I was there, I did administrative reform projects, financial sector development, agriculture policy, microcredit, microfinancing, all these different areas, and comes with all the excitement and fast-paced environments of living in a war zone and lots of focus, lots of attention. I was actually even a press officer for the U.S. Agency for International Development, which was interesting. Got to use those writing skills that you learn about in college and all. But so I started there, then ended up looking for the next big thing, which was in Afghanistan, of all places, and worked on rebuilding the infrastructure there, power transmission, roads projects, reorganization of Ministry of Public Works out there. And that led me into also the telecommunications industry, which I found fascinating, doing a lot of mobile money. This is where the innovation journey kind of started for me, of new ways of doing things. What's the latest? Mobile education, remote clinics, all these different areas. So did that for a while, and not to bore everybody with my whole history here, but ended up going from there to then and ended up coming back working on the opening up fiber optic broadband internet, brought 4G to the country. Did a little work in Pakistan as well, and then decided it was time for something new. So that what do you do when you want to do something new and change? Well, going to school is one. So I ended up going to business school in France, and did a brief stint as a chief strategy officer for a telecommunications company in Tajikistan, and then that's where I ended up landing in Saudi. So this long story comes all the way back around for being a consultant with Booz Allen in Riyadh and working on the national transformation programs, because when I was looking at the options for where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, and my whole career had been these national transformation programs, like large scale change.
Yep. And
going from that to a lot of the traditional types of work that you see in strategy consulting is, how do we improve like the EBITDA of a canning factory by 2%?
Yeah.
It's not really that exciting, but the changes taking place in Saudi, the Vision 2030, the National Transformation Program, like that was on the scale of excitement, and things were moving fast, and there was a ton going on. Yeah. And so I said, well, if I'm going between that and working in New York City, doing change management or something, let's go for the big stuff. And I was pleasantly surprised by Saudi Arabia. Again, I've traveled a lot, been all over the place, and coming here, there's a preconception of what it looks like. And that, I think if you ask many Americans about Saudi Arabia, they're going to say oil, desert, and camels, and maybe some human rights things. But when you get there, it's a totally different story. So it's actually a thriving economy. The population is changing rapidly. Everybody's all excited about the change. There's a young class, and there's just an energy about what's going on in the country. So when it kind of came time to move on from Booz Allen, I didn't really want to go back to the U.S. and work with them there. Go work on U.S. government projects or something like this. So just talked to a couple of people and some friends, passed my resume around, and ended up getting a call from the leadership at Neom for a job in the health sector. And I remember telling him, "Are you sure that you've got the right guy? You're looking at the right CV? I have no health experience." But I was interested in it because this was 2020. So everybody became experts in health on Google with COVID going on. So I was excited about it. I thought it seemed interesting. And this was like the next level of transformation, the next level of change, like starting from the ground up, greenfield, well-funded. And that was exciting because all my work before had just been, you have to change from an existing environment to something else. And change is hard. It's kind of like a Rubik's Cube. Every time you move one thing, the other side changes around. So how do you, if you take off all of the colors on a Rubik's Cube, you can then put them back on. Absolutely, it's not actually that easy to pop them off and put them back on, but you can do it. So that's kind of where my, long story longer, this is kind of where my journey started with Neom, and showing up out in the northwest of the country. It's a beautiful area, incredible scuba diving, the mesas, and there's rich history up in the area with the Nabatean Empire before. You were kind of like a real pioneer. They talk about it with Neom about being a pioneer, but I can't talk to many people about, okay, well, we set off, there's a mountain, we don't really know where the trail is. There's not really that much geo information on it. Absolutely, we kind of set a path, and then you figure out what happens, and you go with that. And being comfortable with that ambiguity is actually part of the journey of what we're doing now at Neom. That's the innovation journey,
right?
Yeah.
What you just alluded to. Well, I'm keen to drill into that in terms of the Saudi Arabia perception, on a global level, because I think you're right. There are various misconceptions, not just of the Middle East, but obviously Saudi being the big brother in the GCC region. I'm just keen to what advice would you give either leaders of business, smaller businesses that are looking to expand their provision of services in the Middle East? What sort of advice or insights could you give them, particularly about Saudi Arabia?
Sure. I think it depends on what industry you're working on, because it's going to be very much different. But I think the kind of key word is around opportunity. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of changes, and if you look at it from like an innovation hype cycle, like it's in the early phases.
Yeah.
It's just getting started. A lot of the changes are still opening, and you'll talk to people about the old hats in Dubai about when they were here in like the 80s or something, in the 90s, and what was that like before the Palm Islands were built and the world really took notice of the UAE. And that's kind of where you are in the Saudi journey right now. It's opening up. It's becoming more international. And I think one thing that many people might not know is everybody speaks English almost. Most of I don't want to say most, that's probably a gross exaggeration, but there's a huge proportion of the leadership and like the business class and the government that all were schooled in the U.S. There was a large program that was put on that would sponsor a few 100,000 Saudis to go to the U.S. to get their college education, or to Europe or somewhere else. So they all came back with this Western mindset as well. And you have many of the people that are just tied to the U.S. And I think I joke, I'll be talking to people and say I'm from Ohio, and like, oh, I studied in Ohio. I went to this school. Really, you went to the same school my dad went to? It's kind of crazy. So it's a much more is culturally rooted it is in the Saudi culture. There's a very much veneer of the West on this, and I think that's something that most people probably don't know. And when you get to Saudi, it is not all desert and Bedouins. It's you show up into developed cities. And so when you're coming in and looking at this and looking to do business, you have access to bright young talent. You have access to fairly untapped markets because the country only opened up to true foreign investment several years ago. So you have that, and then you have this opportunity to really grow businesses. And so I think that the story really is opportunity. It does come with its set of challenges, but that's like anything. Anybody who works on a startup, it's not all green grass. It's not rainbows and puppy dogs. You have to grit through a lot of things, but that's anything. That's any opportunity.
And they've mastered diversification. I think the UAE been a front runner in that diversification, the multicultural, multi-ethnic city, and they've got this sort of harmony that they've achieved here. And I guess that's been a bit of a trendsetter for a lot of the GCC region. Do you see Saudi adopting those similar factors to continue their success, of organic growth in different markets? Do you think that's a priority for them? Do they act and behave in the same way in that open-mindedness?
I think there's a lot of similarities. Saudi wants to chart its own course, but they obviously do look to the UAE and Qatar to see what they've done, what has worked. Why make the same mistakes someone else did when you can learn from them?
For sure.
So I think they're definitely looking at that, and one of the main things, one of the main aspects of Vision 2030 was around a vibrant society, multicultural society, and opening up Saudi to the rest of the world. So adopting many of these different practices and making them more kind of a global society, and diversifying the economy. So not just oil, but where are the new markets we can go? It was oil industry is easy when you have a ton of it, and there's a demand, but there's a recognition that they need to shift and open up new businesses. And so that's the huge drive. And that's also, again, getting back to that opportunity. There's plenty of opportunity to establish those new businesses that are going to provide and be a part of that diversified economy. So I definitely think that they've learned and are looking to take a similar approach.
And to dissect that word opportunity, and I'm thinking of speaking on behalf of either young entrepreneurs or smaller businesses that are looking to scale and grow. knowing the leadership and the type of culture that they operate in, the likes of Saudi, what advice would you give them specifically beyond the word sort of opportunity? But are there critical sort of do's and don'ts that spring to mind about, you know, approaching that? I mean, obviously it's very relationship led.
Mm-hmm.
That's a given. But is there anything beyond that you would be able to sort of share?
Cultures are different, and so they act differently.
Yeah.
And expecting to come in to, even though there might be a veneer again of Western society and Western educated, there is still a different way of doing business.
Yeah.
So it's a much more subtle. It's not direct.
Yeah.
And Americans and Germans and Dutch are ultra direct. Whereas if you go to Japan, it's much more, you kind of talk about things, but there's unspoken rules about respect and about who makes decisions and how you make decisions.
Yeah.
And so there's a degree of patience that's required. Because there's a little bit more deliberation, and you can't really be as direct, and often you'll get a response that seems like a yes, but it's more of a, well, we need to learn more about this, we need to think about this, or okay, let's go do that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean a full in, totally committed. But if pressed into having to respond, so you need to kind of think about that and be aware of that. And it's a lot of these nuances of the culture that I think are important for others to learn to be successful. And part of it's patience. The other is, you're going to have a couple of meetings to talk through things. And then, but once there is a decision, then that's the decision, and you go from there.
Yeah. And with Neom, particularly, is to feed into that 2030 vision and what they're trying to achieve, where do you see Neom going in terms of what they're looking to achieve in the short term? Because I think there are, again, misperceptions on what they're doing, achieving. And you mentioned Neom, and some will know it inside out and get it. There are others who say, is that long mirrored building in the desert? So, I mean, but in the near term, what is on the agenda for Neom? What's their sort of key priorities?
So I think a lot of it is publicly available, what they're looking for and what they want to do. And the launch of Sindala Island is one of those key areas, moving forward with Oxagon and the development in that area. They're scheduled for the Asia Winter Games in 2028, 2029. I don't remember the date exactly. So preparing for that and getting ready for that. And those are kind of the key, I guess, some of the key priorities for moving forward, which is what you'll see in the press and what everybody talks about. I think what's not talked about as much is what the original vision was and the original plans for it, and why Neom even exists. And it's around that ability to have a diversified economy and to use this as a springboard to move forward with new technologies. So if you think of doing green cement or green steel, why doesn't everybody do it so much? Well, part of it is that there isn't as big of a market for it, and there's costs associated with it. It's a higher cost. So how do you end up bringing down the cost? Well, you bring down the cost by doing things more often. And so as you start to, if you're building cities, if you're building a whole new region, but you're going to do it all with green steel and green concrete, then you're creating your own demand for it. You then have you're doing this over and over. You get the efficiencies out of it, and then you start getting the scale from it, and now you're actually the best in the world at it. So this is similar to the Chinese invested heavily into solar panels, and they just built a ton of them, and then they got the efficiencies, and now everybody buys it from China because they do it better and cheaper. So that was part of the drive, was there's many of these things that in order to have these new areas of either design and construction, of technology and health, you kind of have to have a push for it, and then you've kind of created the market, and you become a leader in the market. That's how you start leapfrogging.
Yeah.
And so that was part of it. And you first bring it back to Saudi, you're reducing leakages, you're then piloting these things that then you can push back into Saudi, but then you have a market for the world.
Yeah.
And one of the key areas that they're delivering on this is in the green hydrogen space. So partnership with Air Products, Aqua Power, and Neom, and they're working together to build the largest green hydrogen plant in the world. And so that'll go live in a few years. And then, well, now you're doing more of it, you're producing it, you get the offtake, and then you kind of become a leader. So that aspect is something that's not really talked as much about I think in the dialogue or even in Neom itself about why we're doing it and what we're doing different and how you're doing things differently in healthcare. And in health, a lot of this is, if you break down and think of a health system in the most simplistic ways of the buckets, you basically have your providers, you have the payers for it, you have the regulators for it. And so for payer, provider, regulator, how do they work together? And you take a preventive stance on this and you say, okay, to get these things to work together, right now it's like puzzle pieces. They kind of stick out at the ends and they kind of fit together, but they don't really integrate. So if you're going to create an integrated system, a lot of it's not actually architectural innovation. It's not actually changing every aspect about things. It's about making some shifts. It's incremental, some disruptive innovation. And if you just move those puzzle pieces, they end up all fitting together. And now you have an integrated system. Well, again, you're not changing all aspects of what you're doing. So the insurance space, well, what you need to do is you need to shift it so that there's more incentive on paying for preventive care, at home, virtual, diagnostic treatments and diagnostics, so that you can appropriately treat and prevent and predict, which then drives a industry of this prevention and keeping people healthy rather than treating them when they're sick. And that drives a change in the in the provider network to say, okay, well, that new industry, we only have to cover this acute part, but how do we make sure that we're talking in the right people, and then we get them back to push them more toward, get them to healthy to push them more towards it, and then you develop the regulations around it. And it goes back to that Rubik's Cube piece. You have the opportunity to do that there, and that's a lot of what I was working on, was developing the strategies for these. Then you have those puzzle pieces, and what the kind of underpinning for a lot of it is that digital ecosystem. And so you take those, so what are our strategies for this? What are the key pieces that you need to work on? And then how do you bring this to light?
I think it's interesting, you mentioned a couple of key points there, but certainly the more intricate, more, I guess, unestablished changes required. There's a lot of buzzwords in change management, in digital transformation, in project delivery, and I think people can sometimes jump onto the bandwagon of those such terminologies. Whereas actually, I think when you take it that transformation doesn't need to be as end-to-end as such an overhaul. Transformation can be just incremental changes to one system in any industry, right? And I think it's quite an interesting observation, because I think when people hear change or transformation, it's like, rewrite the script, start again. But actually, I think it's about looking at some of the really organic things that are working well and holding that mirror up to see where those inefficiencies are. And then it is just the Rubik's Cube analogy, right? Just making the subtle changes.
And I think part of it is this exercise of what's the future going to look like. And Steve Jobs has a great quote, and this is paraphrasing, I don't know if it's right, but it's basically, think about what's not going to change in 10 years, not what will change, what's going to be different. Because he said, I know that people are going to want a wide variety of products that is easily accessible and delivered to them quickly at a good price. Those things will never change. And if that's not changing, how do we do those things better? Now, blue sky thinking, you can get into that, but that should only be about 10% of your time. You're not going to spend most of the time on making those architectural or radical or disruptive changes.
Yep.
That type of innovation kind of comes along naturally, and it's very difficult to predict anything past even next year or 5 years.
Yep.
Is anything past 5 years is impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you think about some of the changes that have taken place even recently, so you look at with the generative AI, and everybody probably uses ChatGPT all the time now, but how that then applies into fields like robotics, where you used to have to be a coder to look at to help a robot understand what it can and can't do, and now you can just ask a prompt to say, why did you do that? And say, no, don't do that, do this. And it can actually recode itself using some of these technologies. And if you asked people about this 2 years ago, it's like, what are you talking about? Go back 5 years and people would say, you're crazy. Now, not everybody, but could you plan for that and say, this is just what everybody's going to do? Because most of the time you're going to miss. So you have to see that, and then you just have to be flexible, and you have to really, it's building in that ability to change.
And it's a race to integration now, right? Where who's got the biggest appetite for innovation to adopt these new technologies? Because I think systematically it's going to impact every discipline of business in most industries,
It is. So, but you can't just adopt everything that comes out, all the new things. There has to be a plan for it. There has to be a strategy for it. And two of the quotes that I always use, one is from an old German general, Helmut von Moltke, who the paraphrase for it is, no plan survives first contact with an enemy. So basically, you can do the best plans in the world, but as soon as you go to battle, you're going to run into something that
change.
Your plan's going to change.
Now,
the second part of that is actually was President Eisenhower quoting an Army officer who said, plans are worthless, but planning is indispensable. And what that says combined with the first one is, whatever plans you had are going to fall apart as soon as you run into the enemy. But you have a plan for that. And then you can change, and you have another plan for that. And so those two, I think that's very important. And even when you're looking at innovation, or when you're looking at trying to execute on a transformation program, or if you're trying to execute on a project like Neom,
so that agility.
These pieces are key. And there's the third one I'm always talking about with this is the OODA loop. So OODA stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. And it came up from an Air Force captain who was flying in Vietnam, and he wanted to understand why was it that the MiGs that they were fighting against were far superior to the U.S. aircraft, but the kill rate for the U.S. aircraft for the MiGs was something like 6-1 or 10-1. I don't know the numbers, but why was that? And he wanted to figure this out, and he ended up putting this together in for business and for military and all. And what he kind of came up with it was that thought process. It was not about having rigid thinking of, here's my checklist and I go down the checklist, and this is my template and I do follow this. It was giving the flexibility and devolving authority and allowing people to make critical decisions and giving them the tools they need to make those decisions. And so what it basically means is that the two aircraft are flying together. So you observe the aircraft, you observe the situation. Then mentally you're putting together, what are the options here? So you orient yourself to what those options are. Then you decide on which action you're going to take, and you act upon it. And then you observe the situation. So what happened? What's changed? What's different? Orient yourself. What are my options? Decide and act. And often people just forget the decide and act part. So if you can actually, then the quicker you do this, if your OODA loop is inside of your adversary's OODA loop, you'll defeat them. So this is part of Marine Corps doctrine. It's been adopted as part of like pandemic response. So how do you make those changes quicker than a virus can adapt? So a lot of this is, you can make the best plans, but the best laid plans are going to fall apart as soon as you start implementing them. The best strategy, as soon as you start implementing it, needs to change. So you have plans for how you change. You have a mechanism for how you make these decisions and how you do them more quickly, and you build that into your organization so that the individuals have the tools and the knowledge and the understanding and the capabilities to be able to make decisions quickly and change and act upon them. Because if you have to keep going up all the time, you're never gonna be able to act quickly. And so if you're always saying we're just going to adopt everything and see what works, that's a terrible plan as well.
Sure. I think action. I think a lot of what we're talking about and alluding to is an execution on a plan or taking action. And I think sometimes I'm a big believer in not having a plan B. I think sometimes it's healthy to make these mistakes, even if some of them are quite painful. But I think there's a lot of value in that. And we have a number of wonderful quotes internally at our business, but one of them is failing forwards and actually being proud about something that didn't quite work out, right? And we've all probably got many examples of that. And my first business in my early 20s lasted about 12 months. It was quite a painful lesson, but actually then just going back 2 spaces to come back 4, and build on that through your career. I think it's a healthy but painful lesson, but a huge amount of success. And I don't think anybody really learns anything in the success in the good days. You just sort of ride that wave while it's there because you've created that wave. You've self-generated. But I think that any lesson comes from some sort of failure or challenge. In some ways. Do you have an example on where you failed forward before? Like, is there? I do promise you no curveball questions, I know, but is there like anything that springs to mind? You think, what, that didn't work out, but actually at the end of the day, I came out pretty well from that.
I think there's probably a ton of examples. You said in business, and I think one of the first examples of this for me was, when I was in college, so I was going to start a promotions business for like nightclubs, and so what did I do? Well, I got a company registered. I got a website and was designing the website, and it's like, okay, well, now it's just going to happen. Yeah. Well, guess what? It didn't happen. So there was a lot of legwork that went into it. So then that I took a foray away from that for a while, and then I came back to help another friend in the same space a few years later, and say, okay, well, no, this is what you can forget about all that stuff. Yeah, that doesn't matter. You can worry about that when you get successful. But I think that's kind of one of the early examples of that. I think really generally kind of throughout my career, a lot of these lessons and things that I've talked about have come out of failures, trying to put it together, projects that don't end up getting through, having to learn, tough lessons on, culture and how someone might say something and mean something else, and you have to interpret that. And if you interpret it wrong, that can burn you in the long term. So I think kind of specific examples around these. I'm sorry, I'm kind of struggling. I could probably talk about stuff that I probably shouldn't talk about, so I'll refrain from doing that. But I think generally speaking, I think there's a lot of different examples, and a lot of it's very small. Honestly, it's on the day to day. In part of it is also recognizing that you're not always right. So one of the big failures is how you look at things and say, no, this is the answer. Life is not a math problem, and it isn't 1 + 1 = 2 all the time. So how do you use the people around you and talk to them and understand what makes sense and what doesn't make sense? And really learning from others is part of that process.
And where you're at in your career now, I mean, through what you've achieved, what you're proud of, I mean, what, in your opinion, defines happiness for you, for where you're at in your career now? Having worked in the Middle East for quite a few years now, And having that sort of work-life balance, I think post-COVID, a lot of people are thinking differently. And I think the work-life balance has probably been ever more important, more than title or salary. I think people want that healthy balance. And obviously, 4 years at Neom, that's a full-on role and a busy one. So I think, where are you at now in terms of you defining like your happiness now?
Defining happiness is there's a lot of different things. You have your happiness in your personal life, and your happiness in your career, and I think that's it's kind of a, what's it called, ikigai or something like this. Is the Japanese framework for what you need to do, what motivates you, what makes you. What do you have passion about? And I mean, really for me, I think if we're looking at just for taking it from the career perspective to start with, and I think that word of work-life balance, is super important. Because I think this is, I'll take it back to the last question too, because this goes to the part about failures is you can actually just do everything yourself, and you can't take it all on your shoulders. And I think a lot of times, and especially many people in certain positions in their career, are trying to take on everything. Like, oh, I'll just get it done. And actually sometimes letting those things fail rather than killing yourself to get it done is probably better, because then they recognize, oh, well, if someone just keeps coming and saving and bailing you out,
I agree.
then they're not going to learn not to do it. So for me, I think I probably pushed a little bit too hard over the last several years. And so a lot of it's stepping back, relaxing, and learning how to do the things that we used to do and be passionate about, and getting more into sports so you can talk to your friends, or watching sports even. And so you have things to talk to your friends. But if you didn't watch the game and you don't read about what's happening in the league, there's not too much to talk about. And so that's one thing, is taking time away from working full time. So what I'm looking to do is, I really like the advisory work. I love these big problems and how to solve them, and that's basically what I've done my whole career. So that's always exciting to me. It keeps me intellectually stimulated. So doing that for a part-time basis. So that's working with different either consulting firms or companies or innovation groups to work with them every now and again, a couple days here, a couple days there, while at the same time looking to stand up some of my own projects and get an opportunity to be my own boss. And we think we know how to do everything better, but when you try to go do it yourself, sometimes you find out there's reasons why things are done certain ways.
The hard way.
But when I tell my friends I'm trying to relax and I'm starting my own businesses, they're like, those two things aren't synonymous. So.
And you've got to take a leap of faith. I think sometimes you'll always get the people, and sort of quoting people as we have, but Steve Harvey has this very famous clip, and he talks about getting away from people, and those doubters and the naysayers, and he said, even if it's your mum that's doubting you, like, get away from them. Just give yourself that space to really chase your dreams or chase your ambition or whatever you're trying to do. And I think there is some sense in that, where you do need like your own alone time sometimes to gather your thoughts and gather what you're passionate about, through your journey. So I think it's it's an important part. And I made the point earlier about having no plan B. I think that's when you've got like laser focus on plan A, you're clear on what you want to do, it's going to happen, because I think there are a lot of people, even in the industry, and we talk about consulting, advisory, and, that type of our synergies. And I think there are lots of good people that have really good ideas, but I think 80-90% of those remain ideas, and actually the execution on that idea, you're already in the minority. You're already in the 1 or 2% that's taken an idea and actually brought it to an action plan to do. And I don't think that even the most successful aren't necessarily the best ones doing it, but they're the ones doing it and taking action.
No, it's interesting. That actually kind of makes me think of another, when we talked about failures. So in 2014, I quit my job in Afghanistan. Everybody thought it was crazy. They're like, "Oh, you've got this great government job. You know, you're set. Like this is a dream for a lot of people." I was like, "No, I think you're underpaying me, and this work is crazy, and I want to go out and I want to go to the private sector."
Yeah.
And I just quit and went out, took some time for myself, relax. Like, I wanted to get into more private sector work, more consulting or banking, and I tried at it and I did something, but then I wasn't able to get into it. I wasn't able to like break into the real industry that I wanted, and I kind of ended up coming tail tucked between my legs, going back to the same industry I was working in before.
Yeah.
But what it taught me was, okay, there's certain things that people need to know. Like you can leverage your relationships, but also, so you just go to business school and get your, then we know that you have this certain level of skills and capabilities. So like having to go back to then start over again, to then go through and take a different approach to get where I wanted to be. I learned from that, and I was able to succeed, and I ended up getting where I wanted to be for that. And so that's one of the things. Like today is I have a general plan laid out. It's not I'm going to do this on this date and these things are going to happen. Like so, but you just kind of jump. Yeah. You say I know things are going to work out because they have before. They always have for me. Yeah. Because you have a vision to some degree, and then you go through and you kind of make these things work together. Yeah. And you put yourself to your point. You kind of surround yourself with those good people, for sure. With other people that are driven and have the right mindset and the right attitude and want to work with you. And I think one of the things I'm excited about it as well is moving to Dubai is kind of my or maybe it's Abu Dhabi. I haven't decided yet. There's two camps. There's the Dubai camp and the Abu Dhabi camp. So we're gonna figure this out. Okay. But moving here is just the UAE in general. Kind of there's a lot of have a great network here. Sure. A lot of people, and they're all good people. The people you want to be around. Yeah. And so that's part of the fun and the excitement is you surround yourself with good people. And like here we are talking about this, for like your community of partners, right? Yeah, yeah. All the opportunities that end up coming out of that are huge. Yeah. And then you're coming into again a new city, a new chapter in your life, a new vibrant area. There's a lot going on, and so I'm excited about being here. It was fun being in, hiking in mountains and scuba diving and snorkeling on the weekends. But it's going to be kind of nice to be in the city with everything around. And I'm also really excited about my girlfriend moving in and coming here with me. Yeah. And we're going to kind of explore the area, find out what we like. And I think the other thing is not to be rushed about some of these. Yeah. So there will be time. We'll work through it. We're going to go live in different neighborhoods and see what that's about because... Calculated decisions. Coming and visiting Dubai since 2009, it's different when you're here for a work trip or when you're here for a vacation than when you're here living. Like, what's the closest grocery store is not a question I ever had to ask myself, but it's important. Yeah. Where are the good schools? It's not something I had to ask before, but now I need to know. Yeah. But just try it out. We're going to see things will come together, and then we'll kind of grow from there. So I think it's kind of that life, the people who are around you, maybe backing off a little bit of the work, exploring some more of my interests. Family together. I think that's all really what I'm excited about.
And Dubai's come a long way. I think historically, you think about the previous decades, you'd meet expats here, many senior ones, and they might have done 5 years or 6 years or 7 years or 8 years, and they've, done very well, and they've returned home, perhaps to Europe or the UK or America, and they've cleared their mortgage, and they're quite content with that. But I think as the UAE have rebuilt their infrastructure, where their schooling is almost second to none, their healthcare is second to none, and they don't have the challenges of seeing your doctor or seeing your dentist or waiting 6 weeks for something else, because you've got that infrastructure and that sophistication in society. You therefore start to meet expats who've been here 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, where they are they get married here, they have kids here, they go to school here. So I think it's become a far more sustainable, vibrant city than what it ever has been before. And perhaps a lot of what the likes of Saudi aspire to continue.
No, they absolutely do. And I think one of the other things about UAE is you can get almost anywhere on a direct flight.
Yeah,
and that's phenomenal for business.
Yeah,
because my view on where I want to be is I've been traveling around too much. I'm kind of like a global individual right now.
Yeah,
and the thought of moving back to Ohio and just staying there for the rest of my life is terrifying to me. But I don't think there's any one place that I would say, oh, this is just going to be my home.
Yep.
What I'd rather do is kind of establish homes in like a hub model.
Yeah.
So when we talk about that direct flights, I've been working in Singapore recently, and that's a phenomenal place, gateway to Asia.
Yep.
Likewise, great place to live, super clean, efficient, easy,
safe.
Nice people, safe, great business opportunities there. And I've always loved Barcelona. I studied there in university, and it's just I've come to like, that's my favorite city in the world of anywhere. But is that the only place that I want to live? And do I want to be in the U.S.? So why not just start establishing yourself as kind of a global business? And with remote work and all these other things, the world's as connected as it ever has been. So you take advantage of that. And do I need to be everywhere, or can I just get a condo in Dubai and then have some business in Singapore and get a condo there, and same in the US and in Barcelona? And then at the end of the day, Barcelona not anymore. I guess they just changed the legislation, but you can just Airbnb your place if you're not going to be there. Yeah. So it's not just a drag on you, and I think that's
not a liability,
most people. At least even internationals that I talk to, like this concept of like having a just global presence as an individual is not often spoken about, but I think it's something that you can do. And I'm gonna try for it. And Dubai's a great place to start. As we said, there's a lot of things around here, or Abu Dhabi, and then you can fly from there direct to Singapore, direct to Barcelona, direct to DC, direct to New York, direct to San Francisco, direct to Rio. So you can get everywhere from here. So it's a great kind of hub and base, and then build out from it.
Yeah. And you make a good point about Dubai as well. I think there's a lot more to it than what people perceive. Like with beyond the malls and the shopping and the cars and all the sort of the obvious luxuries, I think there's a lot more to that in some of the more mountainous Emirates as part of the UAE. As soon as you step out to Ras Al Khaimah or Fujairah, there are some amazing places to check out. So I think, again, living here is different to holidaying here. So the moment you land and get settled here, you'll start to see that.
Looking
Absolutely.
forward to it.
And what about? I wanted to touch on regrets. And I think we talked about failures through either personal or business journeys. But I'm always curious to sort of kick the tires on certain things, like, if you had that time machine and you could tell your younger self something, what's the first couple of things that spring to mind? I think for me, one of the things personally would be certainly about just if you have that idea and actually take action on that, and not taking too much time to second guess that. I think that's important. Is there anything that springs to mind for you about that?
I mean, I think this is advice that a friend's dad gave my brother and me is life is long. We always talk about life being short, but life is long. So you can have multiple careers. I mean, you could want to start as a doctor, and you can go to med school and become a doctor and do that for 10 years, and you're only 35. Yeah, or somewhere around there. Then you could go back to school and be a lawyer, and go be a lawyer for 10 years. Yeah. Well, you're still only 50. Yeah. So you can go take another career. You can be an entrepreneur. Yeah. So I think part of this is that mindset really helps people in kind of taking those leaps, making the decisions. Like, well, what'll happen if I do this or I do that? Well, you'll find out. Yeah. But you can just go after something that you're passionate about. Go after something that'll give you an opportunity that you think's interesting, and then see where it takes you. Because you can have multiple careers. You can make these decisions and go different places, and you have time to recover from it. But that's part of the advice. Save. It's kind of interesting because as a younger, I wanted all like the super nice things and all these things that I couldn't afford.
Yeah.
And then when I can afford it, I'm like, why would I need any of that stuff?
For
right.
Sure.
But if you always like set aside a little tiny thing and you're like, oh yeah, just put these things aside, and then the next thing you know, you're doing well. But you can't take back time, and compounding interest is a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
So just put something aside continuously.
Yeah.
Get it out of your paycheck before you ever see it, and just keep doing that, and you will thank yourself for it years in advance.
Obviously we are, I guess, a consumer society, right? In many respects, but why is it that we aspire for that? I think in the early stages of one's career, particularly, the very hungry individuals where they want, the obvious. They want the sort of financial foundation, they want a house and car, and that's the first sort of few things that spring to mind. And I think as you start to progress that, either when you get that or even when you don't, but you mature as a professional, your priorities change. Why is that, do you think? Like what is the sort of misconception with that, or why would one's appetite for that change midway through their career? Do you think it's more sort of family focus, or is it, what would you say?
Oh man, I'd say it's more of a psychological thing, and going back to like what are the key functions of a human being? Survival and replication. Yeah. So if those are the key things to it, well, what helps you do that? We're a society that's driven by money. Yeah. And anytime, especially as a young person, it's clear what you have or what others, and you have access to looking and it's like, oh, well, if I have that, then what's that help me do? Maybe it helps me, get a pretty girlfriend, or it helps me live a better life. And so I think there's some sort of an innate, primalistic rationale for this. Yeah. But then as you go through life, and as you've kind of experienced it, because you're hardwired, you can kind of override some of this over time, and then you start to see, well, you know what, actually I have been successful. Yeah. Hey, that's not what gets me this. This actually, my girlfriend didn't come from having a nice watch or a fancy car or something like this. Yeah. It came from your personality. It came from experiences and just being an interesting person. So
that's what I mean by redefining happiness. I think through one's journey, you get to a point where you start to almost like reorganize what makes you happy. Because I think the immediate sort of shoot from the hip is like, you want that success and the materialistic stuff. But actually, I think it's healthy to pause, reflect, think about where you're going, what do you want, and then reorganize that list of priorities that would make you make you happy. So yeah, I agree. I think it's
and it's interesting. I don't know what the trends are currently, but there was a trend for a while on at least millennials. Yeah. I don't know about Gen Z and the others, but they wanted to spend most of their money on experiences. Yeah. Rather than things. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting shift in trends. Yeah. And maybe some generations are more materialistic. Yeah. I've never owned a house. Yeah. I've never really seen the need for it for where I've lived and worked and what I'm doing. Yeah. But now I'm kind of maybe I should do that. Yeah. But that was like the number one priority for a lot of people, and it just wasn't for me. Yeah. So I think it is very interesting to kind of look at these trends and look at where people are going and understand why people do different things. But at least for me personally, it's funny. A lot of my life is. I guess I summed up things with the Navy recruiting ad, actually. I saw it on TV as a kid, and I think it's kind of resonated. This is, 30 years later, probably. Yeah. And they said, if someone were to write a book about your life, would anybody want to read it? Yeah. And I think that's profoundly powerful. Yeah.
Hugely.
What are you doing? Why are you doing these things? You don't have to do it. And if you just do the regular stuff, that's not necessarily interesting.
Yeah.
It is kind of taking those risks. It is doing something different that makes you an interesting person and a well-rounded person. And the more you get these experiences, the more then I think you have these capabilities that others don't. Because if you're always pivoting, you've learned how to make those changes.
Yeah.
And so
It's
how
healthy.
do you develop those skills and live your life in a fun and exciting way that kind of embraces a little bit of the uncertain.
Yeah, it's healthy to be a chain breaker. I think that if you hang around in the same environment, you become a product of the environment. And I think also systems. There are like local systems, certainly in the UK, the US, many people in the US, where they don't have a passport, they've never left the country. This is the infamous sort of statements you come across. But I think it's that chain breaker mentality, that not following suit from what your grandparents and great grandparents, did, and they grew up and they lived in that same little town or village their whole life, And I appreciate travel was different then, and obviously we live in a much more connected world, as we know. But I think as you said, if you're writing your own book, would someone read it? I think it's good to make your own lane and make these changes and just believe in yourself and have a bit of faith that these things work out. It's powerful.
It's interesting, and it's funny because like the passport thing, I think somewhat speaks to a little bit of who I am, but always asking the questions of why. Like, why is that? And then breaking it down and analyzing it. I think most people just didn't even think about it. They say, Americans, they don't travel, they don't even get a passport. And I was talking with friends, and we were going through this, and what I started to realize is prior to 9/11, so like prior to and I don't know when the laws were enacted, but as an American, you could travel to Canada, Mexico, and most of the Caribbean with either a driver's license or your birth certificate, or both. You didn't need a passport to go to like a quarter of the land mass of the world. And the other thing is, so many people just didn't even think to get one because how are you going to get way over there? Because how many? And that led into the second point that I realized is. Most and one thing I hate about like U.S. culture, work culture, is you get practically no vacation. So if someone has 2 weeks of vacation time, or 1 week of vacation, if you have 2 weeks of vacation, how are you going to spend that? I mean, usually you're going to go somewhere with like the holidays with family, so you're traveling within where your family is. And then the other one, maybe you go on a vacation somewhere else, and how long does it take to get from Ohio to London, as an example? Like you've wasted a day almost in both directions to get there. So now you really have that much time for it. And if the more rural you are, it's so the vacation time and the travel time, which is the U.S. is just this vast continent, which also is super diverse. So you've got mountains, you've got desert, you have tropical rainforests, you have beaches, you have prairie land, like you've got it all. So there's this mentality. Okay, we can just do this here, and we don't have to go somewhere else. And that kind of now global society has changed things, because you used to not be able to travel, and you couldn't speak the language, and it was so impossible to get around. Now it's easy. I think back to the times when I traveled all over the world and different encounters, like you couldn't speak with people, you couldn't interact. And even in like France, I was there, I think I was there in 2005, and we could hardly like find our way around, and the menus are all in French and nothing's in English, and you couldn't, how do we do this? And then when I came back in 2010, it was a little better. And then when I moved there in 2017, it was just a different world. And you're talking about, it's like, why is this? And it turns out there's a combination of different things. And one is the new generation, where they all learned English in school. And another was a decision made by the language. There's a group in France, I think they're called referred to as like the Immortals or something, that are about protecting French culture. But they made a decision that you should have things in English
Yeah.
and in, Chinese and in, in Spanish or other languages, so that other people could experience French culture.
Yeah.
Because them understanding what they were getting
It's
would
the
help
bridge
them
to get
understand
there.
an important aspect of the food.
Yeah.
So, and they could experience the museums, or they could find their way around easier.
Yeah.
So embrace that, because it actually does. You're not losing your culture. You're gaining from your culture in that. And
it's just like Saudi, isn't it? You think about that same diversification. It's the same thing. And, we had a Riyadh quite a bit, and everybody speaks English. There are English signs everywhere, so I think they're really adopting the same,
you caught my circular discussion that I was going for. You picked it up. I was going there. You did it. So
I think it's a fascinating place, and I think hopefully it gives Saudi the right spotlight in terms of their efforts in trying to diversify their markets and their efforts to do that, just like the UAE's done. So that's awesome. But that brings us to our conclusion of the podcast. But Jordan, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Appreciate
Thanks for having me. It was fun.